Administrator Regan, welcome to Silicon Valley. Thank you for making time to be here today. I want to touch on innovation, environmental justice, learn more about you and your priorities. You've got an extremely important job, especially as it relates to climate in our race to net zero. So, Administrator, again, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such a great pleasure to be here for this important discussion. I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite some time. You know, as you know, when President Biden took office, he established the most aggressive climate agenda in our nation's history. And at EPA, we've hit the ground running to ensure that we're going to meet the president's goals. And equally important is our mandate to advance environmental justice, lifting up our Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and low-income communities who've borne the burden of pollution for decades. So as we make progress on climate, we're also keeping impacts to our communities of color front and center in every decision we make. I'll also say we have an ambitious agenda ahead of us, and we're going to need an all-hands-on-deck approach to fulfill it. So all of us will play an important role in that mission. All of our spirits of innovation, can-do attitude, intensity about the work. We are all wired to think outside of the box, and that's exactly what we need as we confront our most pressing environmental challenges. So again, it's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm really enthusiastic about the future of our partnership and this conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Administrator, and let's dive in on innovation. As you know, we've got an audience here of Silicon Valley executives, Silicon Valley leaders. That question of innovation, so you've got a 50% emissions reduction goal by 2030. How do you balance your role regulating emissions while also encouraging innovation to reach these ambitious goals?
You know, the good news is I don't believe we need to trade off between innovation and fighting climate change impacts. The president's plan recognizes that climate action presents an unprecedented opportunity for the U.S. to build stronger, to leverage American ingenuity, and to create more clean energy jobs here at home. So we need to continue to strengthen our commitments to greenhouse gas reductions, energy efficiency, and low carbon generation technology. My strategy has always been to engage our private sector counterparts, take a look at the intent of our regulations and laws, but ensure that they're flexible and that there aren't too many administrative burdens, and look at what we can gain from finding efficiencies in that execution and implementation of those regulations.
Well, when you talk about that balance, how does it frame your thinking? You're starting with a clean slate when you look at regulating carbon emissions after the courts rejected the previous administration's replacement for the Obama Clean Air Power Plan. I'd be curious to hear about that balance in more detail from you.
It's a great question, and you framed it exactly how I view it, which is a clean slate. But we are not starting from scratch. There's been a tremendous focus and progress by the power sector to reduce their carbon footprint through investments in renewable energy, such as wind and solar and battery technology, actually surpassing what the Clean Power Plan originally envisioned. So the next step, as I see it, is to look at where we are now and focus the conversation on the future. That means talking to everyone with a stake and with good ideas about what the U.S. power sector of 2030 and 2050 should look like. And again, it's very important that it's not just about EPA and it's not about the federal government. It's about all of us, that public-private partnership. We certainly have our role to play, and we need to be mindful of the progress to date and have a solid understanding of how to fulfill the potential to reach net zero carbon goals. But that partnership is where the opportunity for innovation comes in, and that's what you guys do so well.
Well, when we talk about frontline communities, right now shifting to environmental justice, which I know has been near and dear to your heart, to so many of us here in Silicon Valley, how do you make sure we're meeting these emissions targets while also investing in frontline communities that historically, as you know well, have been heavily impacted by pollution?
You know, we know for far too long these communities have been devastated. But leadership starts at the top. And during his first days in office, President Biden signed an executive order that pledges to prioritize environmental justice and to put the whole of government behind advancing a systematic approach to racial justice, civil rights, and equal opportunity. So the president's made it clear that as we tackle climate action, we will advance environmental justice, and they actually go hand in hand. So, as we make progress on a range of climate and clean air issues, we are keenly attentive to how our policies and programs impact pollution and health at the community level. It's a critical opportunity to invest in the cleanup of legacy pollution, to create clean energy jobs in disadvantaged communities, and to help elevate environmental protection for all people. So we should always engage communities in our work, and especially when we consider climate change. Communities have the creativity, the ingenuity, and the experience to tell us everything we need to know about tackling pollution, climate, and addressing economic prosperity in their respective communities. So it's time that we listen to the communities, focus our efforts on a rising tide scenario, and advancing environmental justice will be a part of EPA's DNA.
Well, I want to double click on that. You being in this role matters. It matters to me. It matters to our community. It matters to so many in the Black and brown community across our country. And when we double click a little bit and talk about enforcement specifically, right, of environmental violations, can you share more about going forward, what your plans are to strengthen enforcement of environmental violations that do disproportionately impact communities of color?
Well, listen, it's not lost on me that I'm the first Black man to lead this agency, and that many of our communities are looking to this agency and looking to me to lead. I issued a directive to all of my EPA staff on environmental justice because I believe it's important for EPA staff to have a clear understanding and clear direction from me on the ways we can make a tangible difference in people's lives. So right now, all of my offices are working to incorporate environmental justice into their work, including our regulations, our permitting, and our enforcement activities. Everyone in this country deserves the assurance that the EPA will vigorously address any violations of the law that keep people safe and from environmental hazard and harm. So that's especially true for our communities of color and low-income communities who've struggled for far too long. Without strong civil, criminal, and cleanup enforcement, we just can't deliver on EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment. Without tough enforcement, we can't reap the benefits from action on climate change and on environmental justice. So I'm laser focused on this, and communities need to see this work in action.
Administrator, what are you hearing from the impacted communities? What are they sharing with you? I'm sure you engage, and it's a two-way conversation, which you know is critical here. Can you share with our audience here in Silicon Valley what the feedback has been and what you're hearing from the communities most directly harmed and impacted previously?
We've discussed their struggles. We've discussed past transgressions. We've also discussed the optimism of the future. They've expressed an urgency for EPA to be more active, and they would like to see action and not just hear rhetoric. I think that they've seen us take action in cities like Chicago, where we've looked at car crushing facilities that may not have gotten the evaluation that they should. They've seen us in action in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where we've seen petroleum refineries raining oil on communities of color or low-income communities. They've seen us take action. So they've urged me and my team to be more diligent in our review of many of our decisions that were made by the previous administration that did not address environmental justice. They're looking for really strong policy. They're looking for regulatory change, but they're also looking for immediate actions where the communities are not being respected, and that's what they're getting from EPA. We've also spoken about the need for more funding starting with how the American Rescue Plan, which earmarks $100 million for EPA, including $50 million targeted specifically to advance environmental justice. They're wanting to have conversation about how that money should be spent to maximize its impact on community-led efforts, not just bolstering EPA's presence.
Well, it's interesting. You used the word respect, right? And representation does really matter. And me hearing that, the way you talk about solving these issues and leading, it matters. And thank you for that. I want to touch on what you shared related to the American Jobs Plan. We just heard from Gina McCarthy, clearly a major focus of the administration, a significant investment. AJP and EPA, can you share more details about what these investments, what this plan means for you and your agency, Administrator?
Absolutely. You know, when the president thinks about jobs, he's thinking about climate. And when he's thinking about climate, he's thinking about jobs. And that makes all of our goals, efforts, and tasks easier because American jobs are essential. So the jobs plan recognizes the profound urgency and existential threat of the climate crisis, but it empowers America to tackle the climate crisis head on. It makes a once-in-a-century investment that will empower America to lead a clean energy revolution while creating millions of good-paying jobs and advance environmental justice. And it'll position the U.S. To meet the president's ambitious goals of creating a carbon-neutral power sector by 2035 and a clean energy economy by 2050. This plan, the American Jobs Plan, touches on every aspect of American life: how we travel, how we live in our homes, how we care for each other, how we build for the future, all while preparing us and empowering us to tackle the climate crisis. So it will build a modern, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure in this country, ensure clean, safe drinking water, re-energize our power infrastructure, and revolutionize electric vehicle manufacturing. So, you know, it really does mobilize the next generation of conservation and resilience. And I'm really excited because it establishes the United States as a leader in climate science, innovation, and research and development. It's just a win-win-win all the way around.
Well, Administrator, I don't want to let you go, and thank you for sharing that background around AJP. I don't want to let you go without touching on the Justice 40 initiative, pledging 40% of climate investments to disadvantaged communities that have often been on the wrong side of things, especially when we talk about our environment and pollution. Can you share more about Justice 40, how the administration is living up to that pledge? I'm not sure if it's connected to AJP, but I thought that was something our audience should hear more about directly from you.
Listen, I am so glad you asked that question. The consequences of decades of disinvestment in America's physical and care infrastructure have fallen most heavily on communities of color, as have the impacts of pollution and the impacts of the climate crisis. So it's long overdue that we have these investments put in place to tackle systemic racism, rebuild our economy, and advance justice for communities of color. You know, the American Jobs Plan is designed to bring benefits to EJ communities, energy communities, rural communities, and urban communities. It's supported by a whole-of-government approach to invest in America and create good-paying jobs. And with these generational investments, from delivering 40% of climate infrastructure benefits to underserved communities and replacing lead pipes to investing in clean energy and lessening the burden of pollution on communities of color, it's just really exciting to know that there is this level of investment in our communities. By the way, 40% of the investments, both direct and indirect, going back into these underserved communities is exactly what the American Jobs Plan and Justice 40 aims to do.
Well, it's a goal that I think we can all agree is worthy and much needed. Administrator, thank you so much for being here today to share so much of what you're doing with us. Clearly, environmental justice is but one component of a lot that you're working on. As you and I chatted, military family here as well. Please see me and Silicon Valley Leadership Group and our leaders here in the audience as a friend to you. You're always welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited about our partnership and really appreciate this discussion today.